Welcome everyone to Managing Madness with Adrian.
And Carolyn.
So, welcome back to another episode. Today we've kind of brought it up in different capacities, but we'll be going in a bit more about parenting. So I am not the parent, but I will definitely have things to contribute on this end. But I was thinking maybe you could start us off as far as being the parent. What are some of the challenges you find in parenting? Being that
That
you're on
is
spring break too, right? So
that
it's a
is
very real.
hilarious. Because if you would have been a fly on the wall this week. Oh my goodness, the thoughts that I have. We are also going through a lot of life transitions in my home. I have filed for divorce from my husband of 13 years. And we have three children, a 17-year-old who is my husband's from a previous relationship, and an 11-year-old, and he's a boy, and then an 11 young man, I don't know, an 11-year-old daughter and an 8-year-old son. So we kind of have the gamut of emotions and hormones and personalities. And I mean, I'm glad long run that I'm not raising passive little humans, maybe. But for right now, it feels exhausting. So I was just telling a friend the other night, like, I would have been a way better parent with different kids. And I was a way better parent before I had kids. And really, even 4 years ago, I mean, these last 4 years of my life, from I feel like COVID kind of started the ball rolling. But then just a lot of loss. We had my stepdad was diagnosed with cancer and then died pretty shortly thereafter. My mom moved in with us. Just a lot of stuff came up in our marriage. My grandma was sick and dying with dementia. Then my dad unexpectedly died. My aunt passed away. We had to put a dog down. I mean, it has just been one thing after the next in our lives. So not only do they have a ton of loss and grief, now they're navigating a divorce. And so emotions are just really high. And it's just so hard to not constantly wonder, like, what am I missing? How am I not supporting them? What do I need to do differently? I mean, 5 years ago, I was teaching parenting classes on Love and Logic, just a great program on just consistency. Maybe not the best program for kids with a high trauma background, um, but a good, like an empowering program for parents to really give a lot of choice to kids, and was really seeing a lot of success with it, with our kids and our parenting and our ability to like disengage and recognize, like, we're the ones with the developed prefrontal cortexes here. Like, we should be handling this differently if we're expecting them to handle it differently. And I feel like for the most part, I can do okay unless it's like after 7 p.m. or I haven't had a nap. So that kind of, yeah, spring break. So there's been a lot of unstructured time. And I'm like a way different parent on breaks too. Like, I'm like, what? It's noon? Let's get the margaritas out and have some nachos. Like, what? You want? I mean, because I am
That's
like
not with your
so.
kids, right? That's
And
you're saying that.
they get their virgin margarita. No, I'm just kidding. No, it's all my other friends. So I am so fortunate that I have a group of mom friends, and there's like 12 of us on this group thread, and collectively we have almost 40 children.
How
So
many of you are
between
on that thread?
about 12. Yeah. So I know. At one
Uh-huh.
point, my ex was like, "Could you make friends with fewer kids?" Because I'm like, "Come over, bring the kids. Like, they can go in the basement or out back. I'll throw them some cheese balls. I'm still getting cheese balls out of the woodwork down there." But I just kind of have functioned like the more the merrier. I mean, don't get me wrong, it does stress me out, and I really want to hang out with my friends. And I feel like I attribute that to my parents because they did such a good job of modeling investing in friendships and self-care. Like they always had either groups of friends or individual friends. I mean, even for my dad's 70th birthday that we threw him a surprise party, he had his college roommates come to town. Like, so cool. So my parents just did an incredible job modeling self-care growing up and having friends. They would do like couples trips together with more like business related stuff, but they had my dad, I think maybe I mentioned this, I don't know, got sober before I was 6 and never relapsed. So I feel like the childhood that I remember was with a sober, present dad, who was, until he died, still going to his weekly AA meetings. I mean, obviously COVID impacted some of that, but they did some virtually. And my mom was super invested in her Al-Anon community and still is, but has been able to, and we moved all the time. I mean, every 3 years growing up, we moved somewhere. And within weeks, I mean, they were at dinner with friends, out with friends. My mom would get massages. By the time I was an early teenager, she was bringing us to get massages with her. So I just have never felt guilty about prioritizing friendships or people. And my kids even try to manipulate that. I'm like, you like your friends more than me. I was like, I kind of do. And they're like meeting needs that you aren't meeting right now. And I hope when you're adults, you have really incredible friendships too, because I don't know where I would be without my group. I mean, I have friends I've been friends with for, over 30 years that I still talk to weekly. So pretty cool. And one in particular that lives in Sweden, and we still get to talk every week.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm gonna consider that when I don't hear back from you in text and stuff.
I mean, I when I talk to her though, it's 6 a.m. there. It'd be 5 a.m. for you. How do you feel about that?
No, I'm good. You can leave my text. Unread. It's interesting though, as I'm hearing you say that, because, and so an interesting development, and maybe, I mean, it's ultimately going to be coming out in play in the podcast, but I'm actually beginning to remember a lot of pleasant memories now from childhood, which I had no idea existed anymore. But like certain things, recently in a training, someone mentioned a CD from 90. It was like the Grammy Award winners of 96.
Okay.
That's when I culminated 8th grade. That's when I finished 8th grade. So 96. So a lot of the songs, and man, it sent me back into like so many pleasant memories. So it's interesting that those are awakening. And when you first started speaking, I was going to comment in a different direction, but the more you spoke, I actually started remembering that when I was growing up, we would go to like a few neighbors' houses and go to their like festivals and things like that. I really think I was the reason a lot of that changed, and because
well, and there's a big age gap too.
Yes. So, so with that said, that might actually bring things into context. So I am the youngest of 6 children, but I am separated from the 5th child by 14 years.
That's a big deal. We call ourselves pleasant surprises.
Yes.
While I was not separated, my parents were probably at a point that they might not have stayed together had they not had me.
And so, I mean, that being said, my mother was 42 at the time, and my father 47, I believe, at the time.
Yeah.
So yes, they were also probably shouldn't have been necessarily together in a lot of capacities, but I do remember it was interesting because I do remember them actually going. But with that age difference, a lot of the kids that were around were my siblings' ages, which were a generation older. It wasn't until people started having their own kids, and it wasn't until the grandchildren that I ultimately had someone more to connect with.
At your age, yeah.
But a lot of that too was just when as far as I consider when middle school started, so around 6th, 7th grade, that's when I really consider anxiety, depression, ADHD
Mm-hmm.
just really kicking in. You could
Mm-hmm.
easily, ADHD has just been a part of my life my entire life. But like the anxiety and depression components really kicking in. And I just remembered not wanting to go to those
Okay.
parties and gatherings anymore. So it could be
Yeah.
very much a reason for me not remembering them as much as me actually not wanting to go with them and things like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But what was interesting with that though is a lot of that was my mom having a lot more social connections. My mom is
Mm-hmm.
really the one who has a like social connections.
Well, and her
My
church life and yeah.
right. But even as I'm thinking back, it was like her keeping that together. My dad would go to the parties because he could drink. I remember one time specifically, and this is where I was going before I started remembering actually some of these other things. Is when my father was gonna have a certain birthday. It was a birthday party for him and stuff like that, and they were kind of asking him, to bring to think of some of his friends or things like that. And he really didn't couldn't offer anything. And at the time, what I remember is growing up, I my idea of friendship was much more about preventing enemies, not making
Okay.
friends.
Not the connection piece. Just
Yeah.
like don't cause chaos.
Yeah, well, not don't cause chaos, is don't create enemies. Because so going kind of we get it. I grew up in East LA in the 80s and 90s, and there was a lot of gang activity and things like that. So, I remember gun violence really becoming a big thing during my growing up, and that was a lot of how I had to kind of move. And that's why it was interesting, and that's why I'm much more similar to my father. I've just been raised and I'm closer to my mother that I've like have observed her, and I move a lot more like my mother even though I think completely like my father.
Yeah.
So in that sense though, when I was, living, it wasn't really even to understand friendship on a deeper level while I was getting anything. My whole thing was based around survival and making sure I didn't have issues with people. So I can
Huh.
ultimately could move around my neighborhood or didn't always have to watch my back. That was a
Right.
far
Or
bigger
as
concern.
much.
Yeah,
Wow.
far bigger concern to me than the idea of kinship and closeness and all of that, which I am now starting to understand what friendship means to other people and things like
Yeah.
that. Um,
And kind of I know a lot of times we've been like talking about our differences. I was raised in the 90s in Scottsdale, Arizona, which is a stark contrast to East LA and not, I mean, uh, they each have their set of issues, right? But like gang violence was definitely not something that was like prevalent in my day-to-day life I mean, I like had a crush on this kid in 8th grade who like said he was in a gang, but I don't even know the reality of that. Like was there? I'm certain there are gangs and activities in
right.
Scottsdale, but it just wasn't a part of my life or what I was concerning myself with. And we go back to like I am a 6'3" female that is taller than 99.5% of all the population. It just my own safety was not really like physical safety was not like in the forefront of my mind all the time.
Yeah. And um, I feel like I wasn't even over 5 feet entering high school. I probably am selling myself a little short on that.
I
I
mean, I was
never,
5 foot tall in 3rd grade, so I
wow.
was so embarrassed.
Um, Yeah, we should have an episode on just those child because I was on the opposite end where by
Yeah,
8th grade I was the shortest boy in my class.
yeah. So and
No, no,
like
no, take
what?
that back. I was the shortest person. Shortest person. The girls
Oh,
had passed me up to.
really?
Yeah, I was the
Which is
shortest
it? I
person.
mean, because you've ended up. You're how tall are you?
5'8".
Yeah. So I mean,
I'm
you're
at the age now
average,
where I'm
right?
going
That's
down.
yeah.
Last
We're
time I saw it
shrinking now.
was so it might be 7.5 at this point.
Yeah, yeah.
But I peaked at 5'8". I know that was
Yeah,
fine.
that's so funny because I don't consider you short. I mean, because my whole life
Right. Everyone
everyone
is.
is usually shorter than I am.
Yeah.
Like that is just my reality.
A big thing too is I used to always like slouch a lot too. So there's a
I
lot of
know.
things. But yeah, especially growing up, I was always really like small. So a lot of that was even preventing myself. Um, from
Yeah, from
getting
being targeted or
yeah,
yeah.
from getting bullied because I physically looked like an easy target.
Hmm.
What always kind of kept me from being so was people could see my temper when it was ultimately awakened and stuff
Challenged
like that.
or
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, so I know in discussing just a lot of, as we were discussing parenting, when there's two components I want to kind of talk about it from my end. One, in working a lot with parents.
Hmm.
But I do also think it's important to kind of discuss a lot of people, again, so we're in the early 40s, but a lot of people in our generation choosing not to be parents
Yeah.
and that kind of discussion in society. But just quickly, well, no, I'll actually, so one of the big pressures, because I think it goes into why some of the challenges that I see a lot of parents having, um, is so I'm 41. I had to check. I know I'm early 40s. But I had to check 41, and I do not have any children of my own, and that is a choice I've ultimately made. I also don't have a significant partner, uh, or haven't had one in
But
over.
even in that, even when you have had significant partners, you were very adamant that having biological children would not be part of your story.
Yes, very much, and I think that was yeah. By the time we met, I think that was very much the case too. Um, a lot of it was, and that's where we go into kind of touching in it. Some of us who are now healing with our own trauma. A
Hmm.
lot of, I will say, a significant reason that before my reasoning for not having children was my concern with passing down my
Hmm.
ADHD, anxiety, and depression, and just knowing how much I've struggled with those
And
three.
had to fight to want to survive and
Yeah.
live. Yeah,
Uh,
and really, when I look at it, like I mean, it does still feel pretty selfish to choose to have kids. Um, you know, I don't know, especially with like the state that everything's in, and I mean, bless my daughter's little preteen tween heart of like so many times her defense will be like, I didn't ask to be here. Like you're the one that had kids. And I'm like, well, I didn't ask to be here either. And I'm not blaming my mom for like having me. Come on. But I mean, I do kind of get it, right? Like, I mean, there wasn't a choice in it. Like, I very much wanted her want, and I need her to take some responsibility and ownership. But I, like, I don't know. There are so many kids that need homes. There are so many, as I just had a dog that had puppies. Like, but there is kind of this conflict of like, what, yeah, just feels selfish. It's hard
um,
because life is hard.
right. And I know we actually had discussed it before, but one of the other traits that increases with depression is realism.
Mm-hmm.
So it's realism, resiliency, creativity, and empathy.
Okay. Okay.
Those four traits. Uh, and just being realistic. And I mean, and that kind of comes into, again, some of our differences where you're able to see a lot more of the optimistic side. Because I have friends, most of my friends now have children. A lot of,
Mm-hmm.
and when I consider a lot of my friends, I'm thinking a lot of like my guy friends from high school.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I hear how much joy that brings them and stuff. I hear the challenges. And I can only imagine as myself, um, identifying as a man, how I feel that pressure. I can't imagine it on anyone,
Mm-hmm.
who identifies as a woman and sees that capacity and how much that weighs. But yeah, being now, I do like that it's changing and people are getting a bit more
Mm-hmm.
options and it's normalized. But it is kind of still, just personally speaking, as we're discussing challenges, that challenging dynamic of not having that. There is still,
Yeah.
even within me, that desire where I see that it's like, oh, that would be really cool.
Yeah.
Um, because of how my mind works, I get flooded with the 100 other things that wouldn't be as cool
Yeah.
about being a parent. So
Well,
like,
and those things are pretty loud right now.
right.
Pretty
So
loud.
so yeah, the desire gets kind of muted, but it is interesting now to kind of hear more of a generation talking about this of
Yeah.
people choosing not to be parents and
Yeah.
how, and this will be another, but how that also interferes with dynamic of friendships and things like that. Because you were talking, a
Yes.
lot of your friends have children, and that kind of is a bonding.
Yeah.
element.
And even though I do think maybe it's like a selfish decision to like lead into the choice to have kids, I also don't want to say that to like speak against or make it to anybody who's struggling with fertility, or like I don't want to downplay it. Like I know like the desire to have a biological offspring is like true and real and deep, and like the pain that comes with trying to have some. And then I can't even imagine those who struggled, like getting the chills thinking about it. I mean, anyways, those who struggled for years and some even more than a decade that then finally have a child and they're still hard, right? And then you think like, this is what I've wished for so long. And then like the guilt that comes with that, like, and then, you know, you're not sleeping and you're not being able to take time for yourself. And so it's like maybe selfish in the beginning of like this choice, but it leads to like some of the most selfless things you will ever have to do, right? And three of my closest friends have maybe one by choice, and the other two just kind of more by circumstance. You know, of not having a significant other, or not, you know, having a partner that they would, and that they felt like they wanted in order to have a child. So I really try to be cognizant of that. That like my kids aren't the only thing that I talk about. Are they incredible most of the time? Yes. Do they bring me joy most of the time? Yes. But they're also like, you know, a source of frustration and fear and worry. But when you were kind of talking about just like the societal pressure to have kids, I thought about my cousin, who's technically my first cousin once removed. So my dad's cousin, his first cousin, who's now in her early 70s and never had children, was never married. And we were speaking, and she said like the 30s and 40s, her 30s and 40s were the hardest, right? Because it was so in her face of how different she was than her friends. And just they're, you know, they're busy running around, you know, running errands with her kids, taking them to theater or soccer, you know, counseling appointments or doctor appointment, you know, so like just the disconnect for those like 15, 20 years. And now that she's in her 70s, she's, you know, it's all kind of normalized again. I mean, especially unfortunately, like in the 40s, a lot of people go through divorces or just life change, or even, you know, are widowed.
Well, you have a lot of adult children by that
And
age
then
too,
your
if people
children
have
become
children.
adults. So that's been interesting with my cousins who are 10 years older than I am. We've ended up in the same, I actually have the oldest child. And so we're in the same age now of raising kids. So through that, though, my cousin and I have become, again, she's one of the ones that I talk to every week, you know, so to be in the same season when I was, you know, born when she was 9, and I was like the baby little cousin that she like adored, and got to, you know, to now become like peers, kind of walking through the same season of life with our kids, because it is super consuming, you know, parenting people that are going to be like active members in society. Like how are, you know, and I feel like as parents too, we're like so quick to like take on the blame of maybe poor decisions that happen, or maybe default. I don't know. It's like this weird balance of, at the end of the day, they still get to make their own decisions and choices. But how am I like molding that, questioning that? Like, I certainly can't control that. I mean, we talk about that a lot of, you know, we're all in charge of ourselves. Like, even when they're at home by themselves, the three of them at 17, 11, and 8, like nobody's in charge except for themselves. Because I have 3 type A, like, I'm going to be the boss kind of people. So it's just really a calm, peaceful place around here.
Well, and it's interesting because, yeah, that was a great transition into kind of, even though a lot of my reasoning beforehand was around my trauma of not wanting to have children based around a lot of my trauma and my own experience. Now it really does come down to, I'm just learning to relax from work. That like bringing on another 24/7 responsibility, which is, and that's why it's just like, it really is a job. You are ultimately responsible for a child who, you know, doesn't have the cognitive ability to, you know, make.
And at the end of the day, did not ask to be here. Like, you chose to, whether it was through adoption or surrogacy or biological, you know, I mean.
but also too understanding that it's a living being that you can't control, and it's gonna have reactions that are unexpected and surprising, and like that
Never.
is a 24/7 thing. And that's where now a lot of that of my choice is not. I am in my life too, where depending on partners too, where if I am at a point where I could see myself increasing the quality of life of another living being, and it also makes sense and everything, I not writing that off forever.
Yeah. Okay.
But a lot of it now is too that's just parenting sounds like
Yeah.
so much work. And
Yeah.
that's
Or
why it's
you're
just
also
like,
at the age too, if you were to date someone, there's a likelihood that they would come with kids, as an
that is
added
true,
bonus,
right?
So,
Um, yes, and dating can be a whole nother episode, but it's also
yeah.
interesting because I've gone through kind of the ages of where that's been a big red flag against me
Yeah.
in a lot of ways
Mhm.
too, is
That you didn't want to be the one that was
potential partners knowing
procreating.
that I wasn't looking to be a father, and that wasn't in my plan. And I have been honest with that up front.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's kind of a big deal, right? I mean, I feel like that's a vulnerable, transparent, just honest place to come from.
Well, and it speaks to a lot of what we've been saying, where it is a really serious topic, and it is
Mhm.
a need. And I mean, I've mentioned a lot of just even the social pressures, which, like you mentioned, biological pressures, and just natural. I mean, in a lot of ways, part of our function is reproducing. We
Mhm.
cease to
Mhm.
exist if we don't reproduce.
Right.
So that drive is clearly there, but just how much that really brings, um, now, and we can in a future episode really discuss just like empathy for kids and growing up in this area. But what I find interesting, and this is where I'd love like where we have people like comment or something like this, because for me with the internet, I believe we brought in a whole new era, especially the instant internet,
Yes.
a whole new era for the first time in like human civilization, where it is potential for a child to have more access to more information than the adult.
Yep.
And that's never been a reality because we've always needed to pass on knowledge either through books
Yeah.
or whatever, but just the
Yeah. I
more
mean, yeah,
time
it
you had
started
alive,
as an oral tradition and then
right?
written,
It's
and
just
yeah.
the more time you had alive, the more time you had to accumulate information and knowledge. So
Huh?
you just had more time. Now
Yeah.
we introduced a whole new language of the internet that
Yeah.
a lot of generations above us, older than us, don't know how to utilize it the way kids can.
And it's
So,
so easy for them. I mean, I
right,
can't
it's a
even tell
different
you the amount of
language.
times that Alexa shows me up because I can't even say it because she'll respond. Like, we literally have to spell it.
Oh,
Or
that's
in your
hilarious.
case, SIRI. Like, you can't
Yeah.
say it because she's gonna say something.
No, but I mean, yeah. Now, where we've always had that, and now youth, it's a whole new language, and youth know how to
Yeah.
speak it better than even myself, where I grew up. I didn't have instant internet until we were working. So I lived off campus, so I
Hmm.
had dial-up even in college.
Hmm.
Um, but when we started working is when I had faster internet. But
Yeah,
that's like,
and we were the last generation that graduated even before Facebook, right? So Facebook, I
mhm.
took, well, I guess it was our last year because I took 5 years to graduate because I had a student teach and I played basketball and I couldn't do that while I was playing basketball. So in 2005 is when it started, but at the time it was so serious. Remember, like, you had to have a college email
Well,
address.
that's
You
why
had
I
to like
remember it.
verify
Yeah.
you're a student. So like I graduated college not having anything on social media of my college experience. And I mean, and
Yeah.
I wasn't even like that
Same. Yeah.
wild of a person, but there's still some things I would not have wanted on the internet,
Right.
to,
I mean, and that's where we can really go into empathy
yeah,
for the
that's a good
youth,
one. I wrote
because
that down.
because that's a big social. I don't, as we've just discussed with my own anxiety and depression, I can't imagine how many challenges I would have had with
I
social
know. And
media.
it's hard, and raising kids with access to that. I mean, the beauty
Yeah.
is that I'm coming into this age of parenting where there've been some trial and error, so I can like very much see what my kids are accessing and like, limit their app time and limit their daily usage and la la la. But you also, because it's going to be a part of their everyday life, I kind of want them to be able to have some trial and error while they're still in the safety of our home. But I mean, our oldest has kind of really taken advantage of some of that. And yeah, it's hard to know. But I'm like, he's going to be 18 in 4 months. Like, so, ugh, yeah.
No, and that's where I can't imagine how much that, and I don't hear that enough as far as in just general like research or things discussed of how much that has had to have such a huge impact on parenting, because
Yeah,
it really is a different child, because
it is. I
as
mean,
much as
my daughter went through a thing with cyberbullying this year, and thankfully, her principal and the administration took it super seriously. And on both parts, right? That like my daughter saw what that can do, so she isn't a part of that in the future. But also that those girls learned in elementary school, and I think really did learn a lesson, and it scared them, to have the conversation about how real and how harmful and how hurtful when you can just hide behind a screen and like send a video or send a text that's just horrible.
right. Um yeah,
Sorry,
and even just the exposure to that consistently while your brain is developing. But I think, like you were mentioning, one of the things I do have to like commend you on, just in the sense of where I've been able to connect most with my mother. So going kind of back into the like parenting component, I don't consider the relationship me and my mother had like growing up to be a very positive one.
Mm-hmm.
I do consider our relationship now to be a very positive one,
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
a lot of that has been finally her having that humility to understand that she didn't know
Mm-hmm.
everything and could actually learn from the things I had to share, especially when I was
Yeah.
adult.
Yeah.
Um,
I love that too. My dad is now passed away, but we had lots of good conversations about perspectives and experiences. And like I said, one of the most healing conversations I've had was with my mom, just kind of like, whoa, I didn't even like consider that that was your experience. So that's what gives me hope in raising my kids, is because of the healing that has come and walking through some hurts with both of my parents, of like, okay, I might be inadvertently hurting my kids right now, but like if I can like remain humble and own that I've messed up and like acknowledge that their experience was maybe way different than my intent was, there's just so much power in that. So I'm hopeful
hmm,
one day my kids will see, or just be able to see the bigger picture. Like I feel like I experienced and understood my parents so much differently when I had my own children. Of like, oh, you didn't really hate me. I just was probably really freaking annoying. And you were done and like trying to balance all these other things but that is hard. But even kind of back to the social media part, that's hard as a parent too. The amount that my kids will be like, get off the phone, like I am here right now. And I'm like, you are so true or so right. Like I need to just be present, because it's so much easier to like zone and disengage and than to constantly, especially as feelers, right, to always have to be like experiencing what other people are going through. So it's a lot.
yeah,
I'm tired.
no. But no, I think that also it was interesting because we discussed how I think we're a very interesting generation, just because we
Mm-hmm.
didn't have the internet like that in say our
Yeah,
core years of development, our earliest years of development, but we're still young enough that like I'm on my phone all the
it's a
time.
part of
Like
our
I'm
daily life.
addicted
Yeah.
to technology at this point too, even though I didn't grow up with it necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't ever want to wait for like a show The idea of like
Yeah,
when
and
things get
like
released.
commercials? Come
Yeah.
on. Who's got time for that?
Um, right. Um, and well, because I think this kind of just, well, it might fit into just empathy for the youth as well. But one of the things is just how our society and just culture doesn't really, and again, speaking of like American culture, it really doesn't have any benchmarks of delayed gratification anymore. Just even in the simplicity
No.
of, waiting a week for episode or waiting for mail or
Yeah.
waiting for anything. Everything is
Yeah.
so immediate now. And if you've always been raised in a world where everything is immediate, where would
Yeah,
you
because we
ever
can
develop?
remember when you had to watch commercials and could like go
Right.
to the bathroom or had to wait till the next week or could, yeah, it is
Well,
scary.
and I mean, even then, as we're talking about just different parenting, I can remember being told when I was younger, oh, you'll understand when you're older. And not having anywhere to go to really have a response for that.
Yeah.
Now
So
a kid could literally Google whatever you just like questioning,
yeah,
and they can now know now.
I
Like instead of they don't have
right,
to
and
wait.
I mean, and but even that, like some people aren't even taking that into consideration. Like my oldest had one of his teachers tell them this year, like that we were a population of 11 billion people in the world, and he's like, pretty sure it's like 8. And she's like, I mean, a lot of people died with COVID. And I was like, not 3 billion people. Like, so, but yeah, I mean, the fact checked right there. Now, like, get your facts right when you're telling. That's a pretty significant difference. And to attribute it to, I don't know. Anyway, I was like, oh gosh, yeah, it is hard even being a teacher, right? When everything can be fact checked so quickly but I do think, I mean, I think there's a positive side to that too, of like truth and availability of knowledge. But then you
Oh
also have
yeah.
to teach your kids and students like how do we vet sources? How do we look at like biases? Okay, we're into like a whole nother episode. So
Yeah. No, but I mean, I think no, really, and what I think you're saying really highlights the challenges of parenting, modern parenting, because those are skills. Like the last things you just mentioned are skills I learned in college.
yeah,
Like as
which
far as
now they have
critical,
to know by third grade.
right?
I mean, when that's when they're like if they're able to read or they really don't even have to read because all the text to speech or speech to text stuff now, like the access to, oh lordy, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
like, what's technology going to look like 20 years from now? It's so hard to think about like what else can happen. Like this is, but obviously
Right.
more. I mean, there's so much.
Yeah.
Anyways, I think that's a wrap for now because parenting is hard, and that's it. I wanted to name this episode effing parenting, but said we could not.
I mean,
It's
maybe
like
we will. We
the
had it.
biggest joy and the biggest struggle, I think, of any parent's life, right? So,
Okay. I mean, we can definitely. I'll work on like asterisks for most of
yeah.
the lettering there, and people can assume. Uh, but yes, thank you again. Parenting is a big component of life, so we'll be touching into different episodes. But we did want to just have an episode in as far as some of the modern challenges of parenting and just even the challenges of not being a parent and choosing to
Yeah.
be that and what
Yeah.
that kind of comes
Or
with.
not choosing. And yeah, struggles with infertility kind of mentioned before, or not having the right
Right, not
timing or
having even
whatever.
a
I mean,
choice.
there's a lot of things beyond just choice.
Right. So all those complications, just around the topic of parenting. But if you stuck with us, thank you for another episode. Again, we'll have another one in a couple of weeks. So please like, subscribe, comment. Let us know what you want to hear, what story you'd like us to expand on. That would really help us out. But thank you. Wishing you all peace, love, and power, and hoping to see you again soon.